All right, let's go ahead and continue on with the Hyperion Project. We are getting so close. As a matter of fact, in this video, by the end of it, we will be standing inside a room with the ability to go in a direction into another room and return back. In fact, we'll even take it a step further. We'll throw an item into one of the rooms and make sure that we can pick it up and put it down. So Logan, we need to start by first adding some constructors. Ooh, that sounds kind of scary. Let me grab my mouse one more time from Logan and talk about constructors. Basically, a constructor is a method, if you will, that's going to automatically fire when that object is created. It allows us to initialize things about that object right from the get-go. Is that a good way to describe it?
Exactly like you said. It's a method that automatically gets called as soon as something's created.
Yeah, I'm just looking for the simplest way to say it without confusing anybody. All right, so let's show them the two constructors that are needed and talk about why.
Okay. First, I'm going to pick on player, jump back into player, and jump down right after the property section, but before the public method section. I'm going to keep this outside of the methods just because it is more of a special case than a method you make, which could be called by you or could not be called by you at all.
Right.
Because a constructor, because it's automatically called, it will always happen. You will always have the code inside the constructor fire.
Okay.
So let's begin this. The syntax that you use for constructors differs based on whether or not you have a static class or an instance class or otherwise. But because this is a static class, we're going to have to start the constructor by saying static player as technically the name of our constructor, and I'm going to put an open and closing parenthesis after it, and then block it in. And you'll notice the moment I put the parentheses, it went from being the green highlight color to just black, indicating that it was now recognizing this as a method, and it is in fact the constructor for this class.
Right. And notice it's the exact same name, exact same casing as the class name itself. That's the key thing here.
Right. All right, so why are we setting up a constructor? Well, we have this list that we use to hold inventory items. And that list is in of itself an object. And that object has to be created before we use it, because this name only refers to an inventory item list that could exist. It doesn't automatically make one.
Right.
We're responsible for making the actual list. So what we're going to do is inside of the constructor, we're going to take our inventory items and say that it is equal to a new object of type list, and the list itself is going to be a list of item. And because we're creating a new one, we're more or less calling list as though it's a method, calling its constructor. So we need to specify an empty parameter list for it. And I think that should be it. I'm going to build to make sure that everything is building fine, and there we go. That's all we need for the constructor for player.
So when player is created, which is really the moment we run the application because it's a static class,
right.
That very instance it's created, the constructor hits and the inventory items is actually created. So now we have an inventory items in our player that's ready to accept items.
Right. Now we need to do the same thing to room, because if we jump over to room and look at it, we have two lists. We have a list of strings for our exits, and we have a list of item for our items. So we'll do the same thing. We'll jump down between the property section and the public methods, and we'll declare our constructor. Now in this case, this is an instance class, so we're not going to use the keyword static, obviously. And a constructor is public, so we'll start this with public, and then the class name room, open closing parenthesis, and we'll block it in. And again, the room turns black to indicate that it's a method, and it's the constructor. So same thing as before. We're going to start with exits, say that exits is equal to a new list of type string, and then open closing parenthesis and terminator. And again, this list simply matching the type of list that exits is defined as.
That's right, but now it exists.
Now we need to do the same thing for items. We'll say that our items are equal to a new list of type item, and open closing parenthesis terminator. And that should be that for the room constructor. I'll build, and everything's working fine. As a matter of fact, we have fewer warnings as we're starting to use some of these lists in code, as they're now in use in the constructor.
That's true. Good point. All right, so now that we've got our two constructors in place, so both of these constructors are going to fire the moment those objects get basically brought into the world. So the moment we start the application, player exists, so its constructor fires one time. And then with rooms, now rooms is not a static class. So every time a room is created, that constructor is fired for that instance of the class, for that object that gets created.
Right, that means if we were to make 4 rooms, one after another, we would also end up with 4 exit lists and 4 items lists, each one in its respective room.
That's right. Beautiful. Okay, Logan, so next. Ready to head on over to level?
Yes, now we're ready to begin working on an actual level to be built out of rooms and items and all that good stuff.
Okay.
So let's start, we'll start with initialize. We'll just simply have initialize call our build level method. And then we can focus on build level itself.
Now this right here, this whole method could be changed around so that if we wanted to deal with a level that's been saved out as data in an XML file or some sort of other file format, but we are following a very, very linear coding approach to building the level here. I just wanted to point that out real quick. I mean, if we were going to create this as a commercial product and release it, this would be quite a bit different, I'm sure.
Exactly. We're basically just going to code the level construction in C#, so you can use things you're familiar with, directly access rooms, set their titles, do things that we've done so far. Because if we get into having a level exist as a file, we have to introduce loading a file and processing that file and taking what the file says and translating that into our own data types and objects. And
the funny thing is, we did that, and we were going to present that at first. But then we thought more and more about it and said, nah, that really goes too far beyond the scope of just introducing you to a basic game construction project where you have a game at the end that you can play. So it'll work by keeping everything inside a build level. So for all of you guys out there that are going to be following this video and then creating your own game, inside the build level method, this is where it's all going to take place. This is where you're going to define your level.
Right. As a matter of fact, you can, when you're done with this, you can look at the block of code that exists within inside of build level as your level. That's what physically defines your level.
Gotcha. So in this case, how about we do the following?
Okay.
Let's let me grab a over here
whiteboard
and we can build. I know we could build a single room and stand in it, Logan. But how about we just go ahead and build 2 rooms? You cool with that?
Yeah, and that way it will make a little bit more sense because we get to test out our display lists for exits, and we get to test the move if we have 2 rooms.
Exactly. So we're going to have 2 rooms, and I hope you guys don't mind. I'm going to play for just a minute. Let's go ahead and make the first room red. That's the red room. And let's make the second room, I don't know, like blue maybe. And that's the blue room. And then let's go ahead and put a door in there, right, like such. And then we can initialize our player to start out in this room right here. So reminding everybody what this looks like in regards to the grid. Basically, this right here, we've got 0 and 1. And what do we have over here? 0. So we always have X first. So basically you're looking at, this is going to be 0, 0, and, or excuse me, X first. I said it right. What am I thinking? And 1, 0. Okay? So there we go. That's what we're going to build. And we're going to keep this real simple. We'll just say that the red room will have a title of the red room. And its description will be, you entered the red room. And the blue room, we'll say its title is the blue room. And its description will be, you just entered the blue room. Now, from the red room, again, just as a reminder, we've got north, south, and then east and west, right? So the red room is going to have an exit to the east. And over here in the blue room, we're going to have an exit to the west for this to work right, for us to be able to travel back and forth between the rooms. Okay? So with that, Logan, let's go over here and see if we can put that together real quick.
Okay. Now, before we start creating individual rooms, we have to take a look at our room grid, this variable right here. You see we've defined it as being a 2-dimensional array, but we haven't said how many elements it has in X and Y.
Right.
So we haven't stated the size of our array yet. As a matter of fact, we haven't created it yet. So that's the first thing we need to do when we start building a level, is first set up the grid that can contain rooms. And so we can do that by taking our rooms and saying that rooms equals new, there's that new keyword again, new room, and this time we'll specify an exact dimension, or dimensions. We'll begin this one as a, I guess we could do a 2 by 1 if you want to.
Okay.
Just go with the example that we've got drawn.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got 2 rooms, so 2 elements in X, 1 in Y, so that way we have 2 rooms.
Okay.
Now we can go and we need to make 2, I guess you would almost call them in this case temporary variables, variables which can temporarily hold a room and an item so that we can use them later or use them multiple times. So I'm just going to say I'm going to have a room variable of type room and an item variable called item.
So basically he's just declaring 2 variables there, and these variables hold objects. The room with a smaller r variable is going to hold an actual room object when we create it from the class, and the item variable is going to hold an actual item object when we create an item.
Okay. Now for the next part, when we get into actually making rooms and assigning them to grid coordinates, I'm going to comment out what I'm going to do first.
Sounds good.
And then do it in code. So the first thing that we need to do is create a new room. And that looks good. So how do we create a new room? Well, we take our room variable and we assign a new object of type room to it. So we say we want a new room, call its constructor with empty parameters or empty arguments. So that the room will create a new room for us and store it back in the room variable.
Wow, it all starts to come together now. If you guys remember all the way back over here in rooms, rooms was not a static object, it's not a static class, which means that we can have multiple instances of it. So back over here in level then, what Logan has just done is he has created a variable called room that's capable of holding rooms, a room object. Now down here he's actually used it. He said, okay, in that variable place where we can hold something, let's hold a new instance of the room class. In other words, let's hold a room object in here. So now the room that exists in here, it's its own real deal. It's its own real room. Okay, so I just wanted to throw that in real quick.
And just to further what you said about it being an instance class and having the ability to have multiple copies of this object, you not only have multiple copies, but you could also have no copies if you never define one. You could have one if you define only one or create only one, or multiple if you create more than one.
Absolutely.
Also, since you, of course, can have multiple, there's nothing that will save the rooms for you. If you just create a bunch of rooms, if you were to take out this part and just say new room, you would have a room, but you wouldn't be able to access it. You'd have to remember yourself where you put it.
Right.
That's why we have the room variables. We can say, all right, this room, for now, we'll access it using this variable.
Now, you'll notice in the very next step, Logan can actually start to use that room variable as if it was a true room.
Right. The very next thing I want to do is take this room because the room exists on its own. It doesn't exist within our room's grid. And we need it to exist within the room's grid so we can use the grid to look up the room.
Right.
So that means we need to assign this room to location, and this is going to be our first room, our the left red room.
0,
so we'll
0.
assign this to location 0, 0.
Okay.
To do that, we'll say that the room's grid position 0, 0 is equal to room. So the same way that room is actually holding a reference to this new room, now room 0, 0 will also hold the same thing. So at this point in time, right after we do this, we could actually use rooms 0, 0 and room interchangeably. They would both mean the same thing.
Okay.
But the upshot of that is later, once we're done with build level, we no longer have room because this room variable exists only inside of build level.
Right.
Whereas rooms exists inside anything that can see the entire level.
That's right.
But now that it's assigned, let's set up a few properties for this room. So I'll set room properties. Now you'll notice here I'm going to continue using our single room variable. And even though we've assigned it beforehand, this will keep up with our current room because, again, the room itself just exists.
Right.
Any way we talk to it is really just something pointing at that one room that exists.
Right. Now go ahead and back up if you want to say, yeah, room dot, and check this out. Look at this. Now we can start seeing all of the methods and properties inside of room. Everything that's public, everything we're allowed to see, since we are outside of room at the moment.
Right. So let's set the title property of our room, and we'll set this to red room. Let me get the capitalization on that. And there we go. Let's also set the room's description.
Go ahead and have it say, you have entered the red room.
So room.description should say, you have entered the red room. Alright.
Okay. Now what else you want to do? Well, at this point, we're going to need one exit in here.
Right. Otherwise, we won't be able to move at all. So we need to take this room. Since this isn't really... It's kind of like a property. I'm just wondering in my head if I should add a separate comment for this part. Because I want to drop down an extra line since it's not a property. We're going to be accessing the list.
Okay.
Just thinking of semantics here and how this should be typed. I'll just type it out and decide in comments later. Because this time for room, while exits is, let's see, room dot, that's what I was getting at. We're calling the add exit method instead of accessing the exits list. But in order to add an exit, we have to use the method, and then we feed the method some value. So we can say something like direction dot east.
To be honest with you, for this very simple example, instead of set room properties as your comment, you could just say set up the room.
That works.
Just to indicate to everyone that the whole idea of comments is just leaving a comment for yourself, letting you know what the code's doing in that area.
Right. And
so
then all this makes sense. We set the title, we set the description, then we take the room, we add an exit to it, and that exit is going to be an easterly exit.
Okay, fantastic. Now let's go ahead and create another room. Because that's it. That's a room.
And I'm going to start getting a little bit lazy and using copy and paste since we've already got the code to create a room right here. So I'll copy out our comment and our room equals new room code and paste that in below. So we're creating a new room now. A new room is held within room. Now we need to assign the room, so I'm going to copy the assignment portion of code, paste that in. Now this room is going to need to be at a new location. And as we had drawn it before, this room now extends out to the east, which means that it increases in x.
So we're now in the next column, same row.
So we're going to assign this to location 0 or 1, 0, meaning location x of 1, y still 0. And that will take care of our room's assignment within the grid. Now we need to set up the room. So again, I can copy our room setup code and paste it in. This time, let's call this room, like we had drawn before, the blue room. And then the description reflect that as well. You have entered the blue room.
And now we need to add a westerly direction so that we can get back.
All right. And that's all looking good.
Two very simple rooms. Now something in this particular case, do this. Go up to right here, right where we create the new room, the comment.
Right.
Go one above it. Hit enter. Now just do a whole bunch of forward slashes across. Just divides up our rooms.
Okay. I see what you're going with that.
And that's good. Then hit enter.
As a matter of fact, I almost like that being blocked onto the side.
Okay, cool. So just to help break things up. All right, good. Now, what do you want to do now? Because we got a room. We got a level.
To keep with the standard, I want to set this up for the very first one. So you say room 1, room 2.
Beautiful. Okay.
All right, we've got a level with rooms in it. Well, unless I'm missing something, it's getting very close to the point where we can just test it and put the player into it.
All right.
Now, if we run right now, let's go back to program and see what would happen. As a matter of fact, let me build just to make sure I haven't introduced any errors in making this.
Very good.
And, okay, let's jump over to program. What's happening? Well, we're showing the title screen and then immediately moving on to processing commands, which is going to create some problems because we're never initializing the level, so level never gets initialized. And then we're never, let's see if we jump back to program now, we're also not starting the game, so we would never, or we wouldn't see anything on the screen.
And if I recall, if I come back down here to the whiteboard, let's see, bring this guy up and maybe find my pen real quick. So if we just temporarily hide a couple of things, and there we go, all the way back to this guy here, and jump inside as just a quick reminder, blink, there you go. So we need to show the title, and we're doing that. We need to initialize the level, as Logan's saying, we're not. We need to start the game, and then we can start that loop section. We've got show the title, and start the loop. So we're missing these two very important things. So let's jump back over and get that in place.
Okay. So after we show the title screen, we want to call the level and tell it to initialize. Then we want to call the game manager and tell it to start the game.
Sweet. And then it starts loop. Look at that. That follows right down the basic flow chart that we put together at the very beginning.
All right. So we build, and build is successful. So now we'll run. Okay, we've got our title screen. I'll press the spacebar. And check this out. The game has begun. You've entered the red room because it's having us enter our initial room. Though I just thought of something. It's working at this point, though I have omitted one thing.
Okay.
We never told the player what room he was supposed to be into.
Ooh, shame.
His position just happened to default to 0, and that happened to work because we happened to have a room at 0, 0. So let me actually get that put in before we go too much further. Let me go back to level, jump down to after we have created our rooms, and let me add another comment that says something like place the player in the starting room.
Okay.
And that'll be a simple matter of taking our player, setting his position X to equal 0, because we're going to start out in the red room. And our player's position Y, and setting that to 0 as well. Again, this isn't going to have any visual effect because we were in the room 0, 0. This just states where we're placing the player, and if we ever decide to change this and have the player start in a different room,
sure,
then we can easily go back here and change these.
And we can demonstrate that in a minute. Now, go ahead and run it, and there are a couple, well, actually, yeah, 2 little bugs that are in here that aren't necessarily a problem. You typed them in earlier, and I saw it, and I tried to point to the paper, but you didn't see, and I thought that's okay, because it's actually going to work out great, because you never sit down, write a full application, and it's flawless the first time. And so we've got a couple very small things to fix, and I want you, actually, it's just 2, and I want you guys to see if you can follow along. So here we are, we're ready with our game, so we can go ahead and press the key to begin. It says you have entered the red room. Now look at this. Items in room. There are no hyphen lines underneath it. It's not underlined.
Right.
And we need it to be underlined. We even had an underlined variable at one point. And then up underneath that we've got possible directions. And it's missing the underline. So there's the 2 small things. And then there's one other thing, just for aesthetics at the moment, that what shall I do? We can just go ahead and push that down, because right now the word wrap is acting as a simple pass-through. And when we get that in place, this will actually be fixed up. So 3 things. Let's just make the underline under items and room work, the underline under possible directions work, and let's just push the what shall I do down from the last entry in the possible directions. Just make it all look a little better.
Okay. So let's jump back into code, and let's address the underline problem. We'll go over to room, and then we'll jump down to the private methods section, and we'll address our get item list first. Here we have our underline variable. Here we're telling underline to pad left, but pad left is a method. It's going to return something, and we're doing nothing with what it returns.
Exactly.
So that means later when we use underline here, we've set it
to nothing, and it's
and
using
it's still
nothing.
Nothing.
Right.
So we need to set it here to equal.
So now, basically, now all of the padding, the hyphens that are going to come back matching the length of items in room : will get put into underline. So that'll work.
And as a matter of fact, if I run it, since this will only take a second,
yeah.
Begin. There we go.
Ooh.
Items in room now has a nice line under it.
Very nice. I like it.
So we just need to do the same thing now for the exit list. Again, we do underline equals underline dot pad left. Then we can execute begin, and there's our possible directions underline.
Awesome. So only one thing in the what shall I do. Let's just push that down by 1 line.
And the what shall I do itself actually comes from our text buffer. So if we go over to text buffer and then go down to the what shall I do, we'll just add our own new line before that.
And after word wrap gets in place, we can just take that back out.
Sure. So there we go. Now we have an underline, an underline. We space off of that text so that the what shall I do is more clear. Now we're looking good.
Now check this out, guys. Watch how cool this is. We can go east. Let's try move east.
Okay, so we try a command. We'll try the move command, and we'll tell it to go east.
You have entered the blue room. There's no items in the room. Possible directions, west. I want to go north.
All right, let's try. Let's move north. That's an invalid direction.
Well, I forgot what the room looks like. Let's look at the room again.
All right, we'll use the look command.
Guys, how cool is that? It's working beautifully. All right, go ahead, move west.
All right, move west. There we go. Now we're back.
Well, now that we truly have a player, let's check our inventory.
Okay. Inventory.
We have no items in our inventory. So let's say our total weight's 6. Currently we have 0. And what shall I do? Well, let's look again.
All right, let's look around the room.
Pick up the key.
All right. Pick up key. There is no key in this room.
What do you know? It's all working. Fantastic. So I believe that's pretty much everything we wanted to get in place in this video here, right?
Right. We're just showing getting the last few odds and ends cleaned up and then beginning on a level. And we do, in fact, have a level. It's a really simple one. It's a little 2-room level, but we have level that has rooms in it. And
in the next video, we'll go ahead and create a very simple 4-room level and then make it a game with game rules. So with that, that is going to wrap up this video. Thanks a lot.